Greetings, everyone. Thank you. It is so lovely that despite the cold weather, that you are joining us this evening. As I hope you know, tonight is the first speaker in the inaugural College of Arts and Sciences speaker series. So although this is the first, there are more to come, and we hope that you will continue to join us for these wonderful keynotes and presentations. So it is always nice to be asked to introduce somebody, though it creates a little bit of nerves. Well, I'm a little bit more nervous tonight, despite the fact that I've introduced the speaker now 3 times over the past couple of days. And the reason I'm nervous is not because I'm worried about speaking to you, it's because I care so much for this person and I respect him so much. For those of you who might not know, I will, before I give him his proper flowers and give my laudatory statements, Lovrich, Dr. Lovrich, who is speaking tonight, is both Dean Roberts' mentor and my mentor. So this is not just a great political science scholar coming to Indiana State University to speak to us. He is those things. But this is a person that we have a personal connection to and who influenced and shaped our lives. So the first thing, I'm going to give him the professional flowers, as some of you say, right, students? Okay, so prepare for this. Lovrich is a Regents Professor in the School of Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs, and holds the Claudius O and Mary W. Johnson Distinguished Professorship in Political Science at Washington State University. He is the author or co-author of 12 books and has published more than 200 peer-reviewed articles across political science, public administration, public policy, and criminal justice. His current work focuses on promoting civil discourse, that's what he'll be speaking about tonight, and building collaborative processes to address partisan polarization and gridlock in governmental and nonprofit settings. So those are his professional flowers. I am going to take just a couple of seconds to say what these things only hint at. The first thing, and something that's very important to Dr. Lovrich for you all to know, and also based upon our institution and our mission at this institution, is that he was a first-generation student. So you think about those accolades, and you think of him being born to a Croatian mother and father who never went beyond 5th grade. And despite that, he's lived the American dream. As a child of immigrants, he's had a life that's been a little bit topsy-turvy, has had turns along the way, some bumps. He ended up doing things he didn't necessarily think he was going to do. He got some good guidance from his wife, we understand, about which direction to go with his professional career. And so it's a lesson to us as you listen to him that if you work hard enough and you aspire and you connect with people and do good work and treat people well, there is a great future out there for you. The other thing that I want to tell you about is he has a deep love for his daughter, Nicole. And Nicole, unfortunately, is no longer with us. But he will talk probably at some point about Nicole tonight, and he's going to describe her in these wonderful ways. And what I'm going to tell you is Nicole came by that naturally. Nicole is a reflection of Nick. The last thing that I want to say is Nick was an incredible mentor to me. When I went to Washington State University, I ended up in the PhD program. I was a single parent. I had one child and then I had another child. And Nick cared about the whole student. And I will tell you that there were times, he didn't get paid a lot as a graduate student, and it was hard to live as a single parent, that he helped me out financially. And he helped me to navigate difficult times, and departments can be difficult. And so I owe him who I am today in large part, along with my other mentor, Chuck Sheldon. But I know, you get the gist, I really, really, really respect Nick. I really care for Nick, and you're in for a real treat. But you're in for a treat that you're hoping to hear from that person. So without further ado, Dr. Nick Lovrich.
Thank you, my dear. Half of what she said is true, but so I'm glad to see this turnout for a topic I care very much about. This is a decade of research, now more than a decade actually, on something that I think is very timely, and your generation is going to have to fix and get back to something more normal than we're having politics today. But this is a story. I'm a storyteller. And a story is about being asked to take on some research just as I was retiring after 35 years of being a faculty member. I was taking care of my mother, who came back from Croatia with dementia and needed a lot of care. And about the last year of my service, I was challenged to take on a new area of study, and I didn't want to do it without help. And I did get help from virtually everybody I asked because they were seeing the same reality. So it's a story about that. A little bit about my background. I'm trained in political science, but my real area of work is public policy and public administration. I'm not an expert in elections or campaigning, or I'm more about how to make government work better in the traditional Wilsonian conception of public administration. And I had a clicker. Here it is. Here it is. I can't claim that this is all my work, because it isn't. I owe a heavy debt to colleagues, and especially to the people listed on this slide. So Sam Reed and, can you hear me if I'm not at the, okay, Sam Reed and Kim Wyman are the 14th and 15th Secretaries of State of the state of Washington. Both are Republicans. Their predecessor, I need this?
Yeah.
Okay, I need this. Sam Reed and Kim Wyman were Secretaries of State of the state of Washington. This is a state that became progressively Democratic, and all the other statewide officials are Democrats except for the Secretary of State. So majority of Democrats voted for Republican Secretaries of State because they trusted them. And they worked to expand the electorate. And how the elections work is county elections officials really run elections with the state office supporting them. And so Democratic and Republican auditors at the county level would all endorse these Secretaries of State. And Sam Reed has a master's degree in political science from Washington State University. And so he's the person that challenged us, myself and my colleagues, to take on a study that I'm going to describe to you. Stephen Steer is the Sam Reed Distinguished Professor in Civic Education and Public Civility at the Thomas S. Foley Institute. When Sam left office, he collected $2.5 million to create a professorship at the Foley Institute to promote civic education and public civility. Francis Benjamin is my friend of 20-some years. He's the mayor of Pullman. He's also a Republican. I'm a Democrat. And Francis is a Republican of the Sam Reed variety, very, very moderate, and from the tradition of Sam Reed and Kim Wyman. Kim Wyman was an understudy for Sam Reed. She was a county auditor in Pierce County, where our capital, Olympia, is located, and then she was elected to follow him. And she supported our research as well. Brent Steele was a student of mine, And he's now a distinguished professor at Oregon State University, and you'll see that he has a big role to play in how we've continued this study for now past a decade. This is my office, my emeritus office at WSU, and this here is the badge that I wore as a lobbyist for Washington State University Faculty Senate. And as I started working at WSU and people saw that I had a lot of contact with people in the public sphere as a public administration person, my colleagues on the faculty said, "Hey Nick, why don't you come and do this job for us?" Under Washington state law, the 6 public institutions, University of Washington, Washington State University, Western Washington University, Central Washington University, Eastern Washington University, and the Evergreen State College all have one representative from the Faculty Senate that goes to Olympia during a legislative session and lobbies on behalf of their faculty. Now, 90% of the time, those faculty reps, as they're called, lobby along with the lobbyists from their institutions. We agree on almost everything, but sometimes we don't agree. Sometimes administrators go over and they lobby to screw the faculty, and we're there to say, okay, this isn't gonna work. I can tell you from our perspective, this won't work, and then the legislators get to hear from us on our side of the story. So that's the kind of work I did for 10 legislative sessions. And what happened is that I found many of my former students were now legislators or on state agency staffs doing liaison work with the legislature. And it was like a reunion. I'd go to Olympia and I'd see 100 people that I knew. And so over time, the other faculty reps from the other institutions would say, okay, Nick, teach us how you do this. And they wanted to study a ton of bills in the process. Between legislative sessions, there are workup processes to get legislation geared up to be heard in the session. And they would pour over this legislation. And I would come and they say, are you familiar with Bill 502, S502? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you know, it has a provision in there for this or that. I said, yeah, do you know where it's gonna go? No, it'll go nowhere. The important ones will come to the surface. But how do you know when they're gonna come and who they're gonna come from? You have to get into a legislator's office and connect with them. Find some reason that you and he or she have something in common you can talk about beyond Senate Bill 502 or whatever it is. That's how you're gonna get a phone call that says, hey, you need to be at this hearing on Wednesday because we're gonna be talking about that thing that you're concerned about. So they didn't understand that the legislative process is 90% relationships and getting to know people and getting them to trust you so that they can call you and say what should be in the bill. That's the goal of a good lobbyist. So I got to do that for a while. So I got to understand how the legislature's working. The job I had at WSU for 35 years was to direct something called the Division of Governmental Studies and Services. And that's a unit that was created to have the land-grant university be able to take political science and public administration and criminal justice in time expertise out to the world of practice and to join the world of practice and the world of academia as a team. And so I had a lot of people who had that kind of interest in the university being able to be a resource for them in their own problem solving. And so when they knew I would be in Olympia, they would arrange for me to say, come on over, this is what we're thinking about. We know this bill isn't working. We're gonna suggest a technical adjustment in the legislation. If you could help us draft that and then come and support us and give testimony and so on. So that's the kind of stuff I would get to do for a legislative session. We have short legislative sessions, 60 days, and then long legislative sessions where we draft a budget, a biennial budget, that are 90-day sessions. And I would just move to Olympia, stay with friends, and I wouldn't go home unless, I could get away for a weekend every now and then, but usually not. Those sessions don't work 5 days a week. It's 7 days a week while that clock is ticking, so you don't get a break. Another important connection. Washington was very lucky, this happened way before I got there, that they wanted to have the best internship program, legislative internship program in the country. So they hired professional educators. They got really expert in matching a student to the right legislator. If you're in the wrong connection, it doesn't work. They have to kind of be careful about where they're putting students and what the students are going to get out of it. And what they really need is people at the universities to recommend people to be connected to this legislator or that. So I got to be a primary recruiter of legislative interns to go to Olympia and make these connections, and then they just keep getting more and more connected, if you will. And so I was hired in 1977 to do that job. So I did this job for a very long time. But maybe the most important thing here is Speaker Foley. When I came to Pullman in 1977, Tom Foley was just a representative from the 5th District of Washington. But then he became Agriculture Committee Chair, and then he became Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House knows what's going on. The Speaker of the House also facilitates a lot of federal legislation beneficial to the state of Washington and state legislatures. So Tom Foley and I met the first year I was there. My wife, Catherine, and I were invited to a dinner with Jim Short and Heather Foley, Tom and Heather Foley. And Tom says, Nick, I think we're going to get to be good friends. And I said, well, how so? You have something that I need, and I have something you need. What's that? I need really good interns in Washington, D.C., and in my office in Spokane. And you need to know what's going on in legislation that's going to be beneficial to your graduate students and in your profession. So we got to be friends, and I could put really good people in his office who ended up staying for careers in some cases. And they all had connections back in Olympia. And people on legislative staff in Olympia, for many of the state representatives, had experience in Washington, D.C. with Tom Foley. So this is a picture from the Western Political Science Association meeting last year in Seattle. And this is Sam Reed. This is Kim Wyman. This is the book that I'm going to talk about shortly. And this is Julia Carboni. And this is my friend, that's Francis Benjamin, the mayor of Pullman, but I know him as Francis. And this is my student at Boise State, Stephanie Witt. This is Brent Steele from Oregon State University. This is Bill Schreckheis, a colleague of Linda's he's the chair of political science at the University of Arkansas. And this is the director of the Division of Governmental Studies, my old job, Christina Sanders. Julia is a critical actor. She's in the middle here, because she's the executive director of the William Ruckelshaus Center at the University of Washington and Washington State University. Bill Ruckelshaus is an Indiana person. And Bill Ruckelshaus is a very important person, the first director of the EPA, and he was the second-time director of EPA. More important than that, he was assistant to Elliot Richardson when they resigned, when President Nixon was being investigated for Watergate, and he fired the special prosecutor, created by Congress to investigate. And they said, no, we have to resign. It's not legal for him to do that. So Bill Ruckelshaus is a big person. He decided to move to Washington in retirement, and he wanted to create a center where bipartisanship and problem solving were at the core of good public policy. And the center would facilitate the discussion between Democrats and Republicans to find common ground in the past legislation. Thank you. I got the cue. So Julia is the executive director of that center. Bill passed away, and he wanted his legacy to be a place where if the state legislature had an issue that wasn't being addressed, that there would be help available to facilitate among stakeholders and generate bipartisan proposals that are brought to the legislature for a vote. So with that kind of thinking, that the legislative process requires civil interaction, disagreement, but a resolution of disagreements in time by principled compromise. But we're not seeing that kind of politics. We're not seeing that kind of politics at the national level. We have Uncle Sam bemused. We have Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg making a comment that is common to many people. Can't we just get back to where Congress actually goes back, and instead of fighting about politics, they could actually fix problems? 80% of our people believe that we should have a law that protects the dreamers, and we don't have a law because we can't do it politically, even though we have overwhelming support for it. That's broken politics. Instead, we're often screaming at each other rather than talking and listening. So in 2010, I'm lobbying for the WSU Faculty Senate, and Francis, my friend, is lobbying for the Association of Washington Cities. And we get a call from Sam Reed. He's Secretary of State then. He said, come to my office tomorrow. I want to talk about something important. And I said, Francis, are you free? He says, yeah, I'm free. I'm always free if he needs to talk to us. And so Sam, he insulted me. And he said, okay, Nick, not Professor Lovrich, but Nick, why don't you study something important? And I said, well, excuse me all the hell, Sam, but I didn't get to be a Regents Professor by studying trivia. What the hell are you talking about? And he says, no, you better study our state, because we're going in a direction that is really bad. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, for years, my predecessor, Ralph Monroe, and then I did it, and I'm hoping Kim Wyman will follow. When the political parties get at loggerheads, but a law needs to be fashioned, a solution needs to be tried out, I would allow for a space for the four corners, that is the caucuses in the House and the Senate, to come. Their leaders come. We close the door. It's not a public meeting. It's a place where we talk about what is a common ground that we can all agree on, so that we can get something done for the people of Washington. So we've been doing this for decades. And now I offer that the good offices of the Secretary of State. And the leaders of the caucuses, instead of encouraging members to go and find common ground, now tell their members, you are collaborating with the enemy, don't even go to a meeting. He says, we can't have that. We have to get back to something where we can actually solve problems. And we say, well, geez, well, what do you want us to do? We can't wave a magic wand and make it all go away. He says, no, but you can study this. If we give you some money, and I can get the governor and the lieutenant governor to put it in the budget, what would you study? What would you look at? So we had a work session. The next day we came back with some ideas, and he liked our ideas. We said, why don't we survey everybody who served in Washington State Legislature for the last 25 years? And let's ask them questions about how important is civil discourse? How important is bipartisan problem solving? How important is it to have a space that isn't about politics? It's about nonpartisan problem solving, and then we have really partisan issues here and partisan issues there, but there's a large space that's just we roll up our sleeves and solve it together. To ask questions about how does that happen? Why is it happening less often, and what can we do about it? And he said, okay, fine, that's one group. Another group is the state legislative lobbyists, the people who are paid to move legislation through by one interest or another. Most of those people, not most, maybe half of them are former legislators who, when they stop being a legislator, they become a lobbyist for one interest or another. A lot of them are legislative liaison officers who work in state offices or are in local government and have to go and lobby in the state legislatures. There are a big variety of people in that category. The other category, third category, was the press and people that cover for newspapers and radio stations and so on, the state legislature. Unfortunately, there are very few left. There used to be hundreds of people from the press in Olympia during legislative sessions. Now there's a handful. And then the final group was interns. People who had the experience of a legislative internship as a college student or a law school student, and we had perfect records on all of them. We had over 400, and 398 of them answered our survey. That's how salient it was to them that their voices be heard. Virtually all of them, 90-some%, said it was a life-altering experience to go to the state legislature and watch people learn about public policy and public policy changes. So we did that study in 2012, and the design was for us to collect that data, analyze that data, and then have workshops and have people comment who were legislators, lobbyists, and so on, to do it in Olympia during the legislative session, and then to replicate those meetings and have more interactions and have the press present and asking questions in Seattle and in Spokane, the two major population centers. After we did that, and we had a lot of people engaged in saying, wow, I didn't realize it was this bad. The National Institute for Civil Discourse at the University of Arizona called us and said, hey, why don't you do this in all 50 states? And we said, hey, you're nuts. What are you talking about? It's hard enough to do one state, to line up all these ducks and have everybody doing it. He says, yeah, I know you can't do that in every state, but what can you do that would inform us about what's happening in the other states, not just Washington, and we'll give you some money to do that, and we'll help you identify people in other states that will be willing to do that. So that's where the Washington State connection came in. Francis knew some people around the country. I knew some people around the country. I had 30 PhD students and 15 of them political scientists, and they were all in academic jobs in one place or another, and colleagues that had moved on from Washington State. So I called everybody I knew and said, this is what we're asked to do, to replicate this study in Washington and other states. Can I count on you to do it in your state and help us get what we need? And no one said no, Because they said, yeah, it's happening here too. It's not just Washington. It's happening in Arkansas. It's happening in Nevada. It's happening in Montana. It's happening in Idaho. Okay, so we got money, did another study, published a book out of it, and talked about it a little bit. And then Brent Steele at Oregon State says, hey, we have to do it again. I said, geez, Brent, I'm retired, give me a break, you know. No, we have to do it again because of COVID. COVID-19 introduced public health concerns for direct connection between infected people and our representatives, so we need to make a barrier and make it possible for people to connect, not face-to-face, but digitally. Once we did that, the logic of, wow, Zoom meetings instead of face-to-face meetings. We don't have to travel to Olympia. I can do all my stuff from home in my district. And the one thing that we had learned from our previous studies from everyone who served before was the criticality of face-to-face interaction, not dealing directly with a piece of legislation, but connecting as people. That allows you to make this connection. And then we did a study after COVID. And then this year, Brent Steele said, hey, I have an idea. I have a doctoral program in public policy. We have a capstone seminar. I have 12 students that are going to engage in a capstone seminar. What I'd like to do is give them this job. We have data from these 2 national surveys of state legislative lobbyists. Pretend that you're going to make a report as a group to the people that are paying for insight from those studies. And then what new data would you collect? So that capstone seminar of 12 people, 6 are campus people in Corvallis and 6 are online students, took all of our data, added another data set. They interviewed people who are legislative clerks and parliamentarians and inquired into violations of codes of conduct in state legislatures and reached an experience and over time. And so I'm going to give you the highlights of their results. So that's the story I'm going to tell about one Secretary of State challenging us, his successor continuing to help us with our research. Now, why should people in public life be civil? And when they're elected to public office, why should they not refer to their opponents as enemies or dumb people or less than human, but they address each other in a polite way even when they disagree profoundly? Well, we think that probably Tocqueville had it right, that we have this expectation of civil conduct from our elected officials because most of our founding fathers and early legislative leaders in our colonies were lawyers trained in the law or philosophers who respected this idea that you could have differences of opinion and still like each other as human beings, where you all share a common humanity after all. But we don't know exactly where all this expectation comes from, but it's probably from that source. But we have periods. This is my youth was the 60s, when we had civil rights movement and anti-Vietnam demonstrations and anti-draft demonstrations. And we have periods where we have tremendous upheaval. But we also know that this goes in cycles. It's not always like this. The norm is civil conduct. It's abnormal when we're in periods of high stress. And here's where we are. Whoop. Here's where we are. We're over here. We're heading up this way. And we'll be here for a while, where it's really hard for people who are in public life not to be disagreeable in public. And I'll give you a little story. We've given a presentation like this in 18 states now. My team of researchers who we came together is about 12 of us, actually 20 of us at 12 different institutions. And in each of our respective states, we give this presentation. Here's the findings for the whole country, all 50 states, and here's findings for this state. And so this is the type of collective effort that's required. If you want to do social science at this level, you really can't do it by a single researcher. You need a team of people, and they need to stick with it for a long time. And we're looking at the same phenomena of everywhere we're talking about this, people can give us examples of polarization and of uncivil conduct and so on. So we're giving this talk at the Hinckley Institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley Institute is really famous because that's where Mitt Romney called our current president a shyster and a crook and everything like that when he was running for the nomination. But anyway, we're at the Hinckley Institute, and we're giving our talk and findings for Utah, and there are two women who are going to make commentary on our findings for the state, and one legislative lobbyist, really famous legislative lobbyist. And the two women had PhDs in political science from the University of Utah. One Democrat, one Republican, Speaker of the House and a minority leader. And they said, we want to comment together on your presentation. And we think you have a good insight, but you need to know something else. I said, okay, well, what's your comment? They said, we hated each other. Different parts of the political spectrum. I didn't expect her to be much of anything. She didn't expect me to be much of anything. How could we? She's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. How could we like each other? And then we had to work together to plan the legislative session and the agendas and so on. And then the more we interacted, the more we were curious. How did you get to be, this is Utah. Women aren't in leadership roles. Now all of a sudden we're the leaders in Utah? How did that happen? Well, what was your experience? Well, the one would say, I had this happen, and I had this happen, and the other woman would say, the same thing happened to me inside my party, in my circles. But I made it through. You made it through. Oh, good for you. Now let's get to work. The more they worked together, the more they found out that they had much in common. The more they worked together, they found out they liked each other, had respect for each other. And then when they finished planning the session, they said, okay, we have to make an agreement. You have to say nasty things about me. I will say nasty things about you. I don't mean them, but I have to say them, otherwise my caucus won't follow me. So that's really what they wanted us to understand, that there is still a potential for people to build relationships that can work. But we're in a period where it's very hard to do that. But you got to keep trying. You got to keep working at it. So we have a pretty good idea of why we're in this space. We have political polarization. We have declining trust in institutions. Our social media are more echo chambers than a place where we get common understanding. And all of this is probably making it easier to be incivil when the politicians are incivil to each other. Then it's easy for everybody else to say, well, that's just the way it is. But it has real consequences for people in public administration trying to do their job in a nonpartisan way. If I'm running a joint base, Lewis and McCord in just south of Seattle, and I have, I think they have 26,000 troops there, and they're a primary staging ground for overseas deployment. We don't want them watching news coverage on TV, because news isn't news anymore. News is the point of view. And we need to have everybody on the same page in the military. This happens in police departments too. This happens in churches, within churches, and among churches. So the National Institute for Civil Discourse started a project. He called it Golden Rule 2020, and said, let's bring a bunch of church leaders in and talk about what is happening in their churches. And I love this one group, the Mormon Women for Ethical Government. When they came, they said, yeah, you know, in our branches and in our churches, in Mormon churches in Utah, everybody used to hang together and sit together and talk. Now we have the Romney Mormons on one side, and we have the MAGA Mormons on another side, and they don't talk to each other. They only talk to each other within those groups. We can't do this. We can't do this. So they got all the major denominations together, and these are Baptists and these are Catholic bishops and so on, to say, what can we emphasize that everybody agrees on? And it was the golden rule. Even non-Christians believe in the golden rule. So why can't we have a project that says, remind everybody to live by the golden rule in religious discussions and in political discussions? This picture showed up on Facebook. So here's Democrats and Republicans at a Dallas Cowboys football game, and Helen DeGeneres is invited by George and Laura Bush to come and watch a game together. And you could say, wow, it's wonderful. You know, Democrats and Republicans can enjoy something together. Why not? That's not politics, that's about life. But instead, the reactions on Facebook were from the left. How could she ever sit there with that good-for-nothing president? And from the right, how could he invite her, my God, a degenerate like that, to sit in the booth and watch a football game? So people that study this stuff, people that are concerned about discourse and being civil and us finding common ground, they're reflected here in this barn. Actually, it's a business in Boise. One of my colleagues on this project, Gary Moncrief, very famous political scientist, studies state legislatures, said, Nick, when you're making these presentations, I want you to show this slide. So it's been shown now in 18 states. And he said, this is what this businessman, when he found out what I was working on, says, come over to my business, I want to show you something. And he said, take a picture of this. My clients come here to get a new muffler on their damn car. Some of them are Democrats or some are Republicans. It's irrelevant what party they're from. I put a good muffler on there for whoever comes in and pays me to put a new muffler on. Why can't we get back to understanding that America's better when we have both kinds of points of view interacting continually over time? And I said, okay, Gary, every time we make a talk, people will see that guy's painting. So, but this was the reaction on Facebook on the postings that have a negative and have a conflictive orientation after the George Bush picture with Ellen DeGeneres. It just exploded into anger, expression of anger on people, against people that have a different point of view. When we study this in political science and public opinion, when you ask people, survey after survey, do you prefer people who stick to their guns no matter what, or people that will find principal compromise in listening to the other side? We prefer people that will do principal compromise, but we don't elect them. You don't win elections that way. And so our system is not generating the potential for moderation. So the question came up in a wonderful magazine that doesn't exist anymore because we don't read anymore, we just use our computers. But there was a magazine called Governing. And it was for wonks like us that study government and want to know what's going on. And the question was posed by Greenblatt. He said, I wonder if Congress being broken the way it is has dribbled all the way down to each state legislature, so they're just like Congress. They can't act anymore either. And he said there's reasons to believe that maybe the state legislatures are the repositories of democratic civil discourse, and that it will get back to normal politics because our legislatures will show the way. And that was the idea of the Ford Foundation. So the Ford Foundation heard about what we had done in Washington and had tried to do in 50 other states. And they said, how would you like to write a proposal for getting a big grant? And our grant program is going to be called the Repositories of Democracy, the state legislatures. So go out and find us state legislatures where civil discourse, norms of nonpartisanship and problem solving continue to be enforced. And then we'll see what is it that they're doing that other legislatures can do, and so on. Well, the more we looked at our data, the more we had to admit, well, we can't find a legislature like that. All of them are being affected by the same overwhelming polarization and the problems it causes. So prior to that, to having our data and looking at it, the National Congress of State Conference, National Conference of State Legislatures in Denver said, wait, we better do a study on this. And they did a study and Gary Moncrief was part of their research group. They interviewed legislators. They surveyed state legislators. And they asked them the questions that we later asked state legislative lobbyists about civility and civil discourse. And they had 1,600 state legislators, and they picked 10 states for case studies. And then we did a study shortly thereafter. This was before the 2016 election. And we did our study in 2018, 2019. And so, according to the state legislators, it looks bad, but it's not really as bad as it looks. It looks like we're like Congress and we're yelling at each other and not listening very much, but actually behind the scenes, what those two ladies from the Utah State Legislature told you is going on. We really like each other. We really, when no one's watching, we agree a lot. But then when the TVW comes on and we need to say something, we say something outlandish so that people will continue to vote for us on the left and the right. So don't worry, this will all go away. Trump will go away. Everything will be back to normal. Don't worry about it. That was the general finding from their study. So our group looked at that and said, it doesn't sound like the legislators are taking this challenge very seriously. They're saying, well, this is an academic thing. You guys are overreacting, that it's not as bad as it looks. So I got this group together with my colleagues, and we got our money from the National Institute for Civil Discourse in Arizona. That institute was created by Gabby Giffords. And you probably remember she was a congressional representative from Arizona, was shot in her district and nearly died. And so she devoted her life, she has devoted her life to two things, gun control and civil discourse. So they gave us money to do other states. The Foley Institute and the Ruckelshaus Center and the Division of Governmental Studies and Services provided us ongoing support to study all 50 states. Here's the people that worked on that project. I want to give them all credit because obviously I couldn't do all of this by myself. Gary Moncrief and Bill Schreckheis and John Pearson and Burdette Loomis at the University of Kansas were tremendous. These are all really first-class researchers. And no one said no. As I said, when I called and asked for help, no one said no. Everyone said, I want to be part of this. I said, okay, get me some money and get me some names because we need help. At Duke University, most of the work happened here at Washington State University and at Boise State University, as I'll describe later. So our research was done with Qualtrics. Qualtrics is an online survey, but these people are very difficult to get a hold of and very busy. So we did follow-ups by mail surveys and by phone calls and by people in their states that we knew them, and they said, okay, get your friends to answer this survey for us. So we ended up with coverage from all 50 states, more than 25 responses per state. Most of them were legislative staff or had been legislators prior to becoming lobbyists. Many of the people who were state agency liaison officers in major agencies of the state government had been legislative staff before that, or congressional legislative staff. All of them, every single one, had an advanced degree, oftentimes an MPA, oftentimes a law degree, sometimes a law degree and an MPA degree. So they were astute, educated, experienced, and articulate. And their comments were voluminous, and the phone calls were even more enlightening. They say, I can't go on the record, but you need to know this. Most moving were women, state legislative lobbyists, who were talking about the declining norms for how they're treated by people elected to public office. And they didn't expect that. They expected that kind of behavior to go down, and it just ballooned. Some of the questions we asked. How important are civility and the maintenance of civil discourse norms in legislative debate to producing good public policy? Not at all, 1. Absolutely essential, 10. The average score among these 1,200 lobbyists, 8.3. So in their estimation, if you're going to have a legislative process and you're going to get problem solving happening for citizens of whatever state, any of the 50 states, the people engaging in that process need to be guided by norms of civil discourse and set that standard for citizens that watch. Overall, how would you characterize the general level of civility among members of your state's legislature during the 2 most recent legislative sessions? And there's more division among people. The standard deviation is larger, but generally speaking, it's the civility is still seen as a norm, and people who are being incivil know that it's really not the expectation of their behavior, but they do it anyway. This is a scary one for me. Do you think that norms of fair play are breaking down in the state in which you lobby or advocate? And we had a 3-point scale, and the average on that score was 2.56. You know, that's really serious, not like the findings from the legislators. In your state, are there fewer, the same, or more nonpartisan areas today than in the past? And it's toward the fewer nonpartisan areas, more things becoming partisan. I like this slide because I have a lot of insight into it, I think. How does the following hypothesized cause of incivility tend to play out in your legislature? Legislators' respect for legislative traditions and norms and customs is low, and we have agreement that this is low. And then the comments were often about not the old hands that in the legislature for a while, but new people coming into the process. And then the comment follow that would be term limits, and what term limits has done to reduce the presence and the force of normal norms. I like this question. We asked, what can we do about it? And we asked this question: reaching across the aisle, trust building, favor visiting other legislators from the opposing party in their legislative district, poor idea or an excellent idea. Indiana turns out to have the highest score, 4.3. And how we got this question is 2 legislators in the state of Washington. When we were doing our presentation after our study of Washington, they said, we want to comment, we want to come to your meetings, and we want to talk. I said, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, well, I'm a Democrat. This was Gary Pettigrew. He played basketball at Oregon State University. He's about 6'4", and he's from Western Washington, an urban area, black guy. And a guy from my district, the 5th district, 9th district in Washington, out of Colfax, Washington, also 6'4", white guy, loves basketball. So they are legislators, they're in a session, they take a break, they're shooting hoops. And then Pettigrew asked Burai, why don't you ever support any of my bills? And Burai says to Pettigrew, well, why don't you support any of my bills? He said, well, because you've got dumb ideas. Well, you have dumb ideas. Well, you know, where are you coming from? You know, have you ever been to my district? And he said, no, I've never been to West Seattle. Should I come? He says, yeah, why don't you come for a week? Spend a week in my district, and then I'll spend a week in your district on Eastern Washington, and you can introduce me to all your redneck farmers and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Well, they started like that, kind of hostile, and then when they spend time together, they decided, wow, this is a different world than I live in. I've never understood your world. Now I do. So they started, they started co-sponsoring bills together, and they wanted to talk about what is wrong is that people get in their silos, not only on media, but also as elected representatives. And they really need to get out of those media, especially if they're going to be working on policy together. And when we posed that question, people in Indiana really responded. I don't know why. Maybe you know why. So this is the book that came out of that research. And all 22 scholars that we recruited to the study contributed to the book. There's got, I think, 11 chapters. You know, a foreword was written by Sam Reed, and working with Stephen Steer. and Washington State University Press published it. And if anyone is interested in the book, just leave your contact information with the dean or with Linda, and I'll send you a copy. We would love for this information to get out. But the key chapter is this one, chapter 8. It's kind of wonky political science. It's modeling the sources of cross-state differences in legislative civility. Doesn't sound like much, but if you're going to try to figure out what makes civility higher or lower across the states, you need an index. You need to have an index that is uniform measurement. And so the people at Boise State, and this is primarily Luke Fowler and Stephanie Witt and Jacqueline also, but they worked out the psychographics of the measure that we had from the surveys, and so we could classify the states. And here's the list. That's a table from the book of who's high and who's low in civil discourse. And then how would we explain the differences across states? And so these chapters explore likely reasons, like term limits, level of professionalization, how well paid are the legislators and so on and their staff, other issues of urban-rural differences and economic inequality. All of those possible explanations are explored in the book, but the key part is the scale that allows us to do more in-depth study. So when we use that scale, we've published 3 articles out of that using that scale. And the first one has to do with what difference does it make? And this is Bill Schreck-Eisen, one of his PhD students, Button, and Francis and I helping with that, and John Pierce at University of Kansas, asked the question, well, what difference does it make? We have a lot of literature on state politics about what well-performing legislature should be able to do. It should be able to process laws, that is, draft legislation that makes it through to the end. They should be able to attack big problems that require multiple pieces of legislation to address an issue. They should be able to get their budget done on time. And I forget the 4th measure of standard measure of accomplishment of legislature. So we looked at all 4 are predicted by level of civility as we measured in our work. On this article is about, is there a linkage between people, citizens, how civil are citizens to one another and to visitors from out of state and so on. There's lots of data in marketing and business administration and so on about state differences, and especially cities. As people visit cities and experience the cities, how polite are people? Or if you're getting calls in a call center about some defect in your car or whatever it is, every major industry has call centers where people, and well, we record that because that's data now. We have computers. We can trace all of that. How much profanity is used in those phone calls from this state or that state? So we used all of those measures to see how it correlated with our measure of civility, and sure enough, if your people are nasty and nasty to each other, it affects the kind of legislative behavior they get out of their elected officials. And then finally, Brent Steele he's really interested in this, renewable energy and states passing laws about how to promote green energy. And almost all of those laws, like every year I was lobbying, if the university wanted something, we got sponsors of our legislation from the Republican and the Democratic side. Well, it's harder and harder to get Democrats and Republicans to sit down and work on legislation, especially green legislation. So So Brent said, I want to use this data to look at cross-state differences in adoption of green energy programs. And sure enough, it's really hard to do that kind of work where the civility is low in a state legislature. So when 2025 came along and Brent had been on a tour, 6 institutions for the NASPA accreditation, National Schools of Public Affairs and Public Policy. He's a accreditor on the accreditation team. And he saw that these programs, MPA programs included, were more and more realizing that the students need to have some kind of a group problem-solving experience. And they were experimenting, but some of the programs are online, some of them are in person, some are hybrid, some are all over the place. How do you do this? How do you have your people, just as they're finishing their studies, engage in a group process? And how do you structure it? So he saw people trying but not being very effective. The people that were off campus, online, weren't as happy as the people that were getting to see each other every day and all of that. And then he said, I think the idea can work, but it takes a lot of extra work and it takes something really good, like a data set that's real live data, not something you make up. And he said, Nick, what do you think about this? How about if I take all that data that we had from the 2 national surveys and we can see what happened after COVID, and then we have all these comments we can analyze, and there's better and better software for analyzing qualitative data. And then we can add another element of data collection, and that is the parliamentarians and clerks from all 50 states. And one of his students was a parliamentarian for the Oregon State Legislature and had these contacts. So I said, great idea. Let's see what we can do. And so they looked at the findings for pre-COVID, post-COVID. And were there some states where they didn't have much change and some states where they had a lot of change? No, it was almost all the states got worse. After COVID, the amount of interaction among legislators was reduced. The amount of interaction between citizens and legislators was reduced. And then the form of communication is more often invited conflict rather than inviting conflict resolution. This was really troubling when the parliamentarian said, we have now more complaints, more actionable cases of people knowingly violating the norms of conduct of legislators than we've had in the past. And we have fewer legislative leaders willing to enforce the rules that we have for proper conduct. This content analysis of open-ended responses, the students were really into reading, and the students said, you know, your data, your surveys are okay, but we learned most of what we learned from what people were writing that have experience being in the legislature. And their theme is concern and hopefulness. They said, we know that there are many legislators who want to act in a civil way, but it's not politically timely to do so. For them to get following, maintain following, they have to be more extreme than they are by nature, and that was kind of concerning. But there are lots of people who want to engage in solutions to the problem. I'm running out of time, so I don't want to keep you here too long. So my concluding remarks is, what are these things that people are doing to address this issue? The National Institute for Civil Discourse it at the University of Arizona continues to maintain its research program. And if you are interested in this area, you can contact them and tell them what you're thinking. And if you want to propose research, they will get you connected to the network of scholars working in this area and say, think about this, think about that, and help you do your study. They still do that. There's a group called the Braver Angels. Women, Republicans, and Democrats alike, who organize get-togethers across party lines so that people actually talk to one another, that they know have differences of opinion, but they try to facilitate those talks for people to grow together in understanding. There's a place, very special place, Gettysburg, where Lincoln made the Gettysburg Address. And the Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania propagates Lincoln's message of healing after the Civil War. And what are they doing now? They're not just protecting Gettysburg, the site of the ultimate battle of the Civil War, but they go to Pennsylvania communities that are divided, where city councils fight and can't help but hate each other rather than healing, and they try to promote healing in Pennsylvania and beyond Pennsylvania, New York too. There's a university network of 20 collaborative governance centers that look a lot like the Ruckelshaus Center at the University of Washington and Washington State University, where they say, okay, if you can't by nature come together in the state legislature, then give us the problem. Let us bring together stakeholders and let us work up proposals where we can find common ground and bring it back to the state legislature. Now there's 20 states that are doing that now to help break these log jams. There's a project, I just love this project. It's called Project Unite at the University of Utah, and it's run by Tammy Pfeiffer. Tammy Pfeiffer is a Republican. She was a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, but you have to retire at age 70, and so she's 71 now, so she can't perform, but she trains people to sing in the choir. She's a teacher. She was a city council member in Orem, Utah, and then Governor Cox, a Republican governor, you may know about him. He asked her to be the public education spokesman for the governor's office during COVID-19. And so Tammy took on the job, and she said, yeah, I would like to do that. I've been a state legislator too, so I understand how to do this. And at first she was delighted. Everywhere she went, people listened to the health issues, and then they started disagreeing. And some people said, well, I don't believe in vaccines. Well, yeah, but if you don't get vaccinated, you're contagious, you just spread the disease. And so she started encountering tremendous pushback, including in the law enforcement community. But then when the cops weren't getting vaccinated and they were getting sick, they got on board pretty fast after that. And then she started wondering what was going on here. She noticed the same thing in the Mormon church, where the Romney Mormons sit on one side and the MAGA Mormons sit on the other side, and said, this is not good. And then it came to her home. She has 7 kids. She invited everybody home for Thanksgiving. And then all of her kids said they never want to come back again. I don't want to be in the same room with her sister, because she's a democratic socialist. And she doesn't want to be in the same room with me because I'm a MAGA guy. And she says, why? How did we get to where our politics is more important than our family? This is not good. So she started working with Sergeant Schreiber and some other people to get some money. and they developed something they call the Dignity Index. They will score your political rhetoric in terms of whether you are according dignity to your people you disagree with or you're vilifying them, and then publish that score for politicians running for public office. And she has 200 students at the University of Utah who code everything now. They're going to do it by AI pretty soon, but this is an attempt to take down the temperature in political discourse so that people, in talking about their points of view, aren't vilifying people who disagree, but are sticking to fact and logic, if you will. And there's this group at the Ruckelshaus Center. They're very concerned about the state legislature not working, but now local government is running into the same kind of loggerheads, breakdowns. City councils, county commissioners, school boards, health districts, library districts, all experiencing the same kind of breakdown of ability to listen and learn. So they've been working with the lieutenant governor and the University of Washington's Evans School and the Jackson Foundation and the William D. Ruckelshaus Center and Washington State University. All are collaborating to train local officials in civil discourse and interest-based problem solving as a way of doing public business. So I don't think we need to give up. I think we need to keep working, and these people that understand that this is really important to our public health and public interest. They're not sitting on their hands, just worrying about it. They're actually getting people engaged and trying to bridge these differences. But I appreciate your attendance tonight. I appreciate you coming, and I hope that you can do your part to bring about better understanding and capacity for us to be the yin and yang. The Democrats and Republicans are stronger together than apart. Thank you. Now, if you have any questions, I don't know how much time we have, but if you have some questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Yes?
You talked a lot about how technology was changing and how that impacted the voter side of caucus and how we see Congress. But how does it affect the Congress itself? How do the representatives change how they act based off of how technology is developing right now?
Wow. That's a complicated question. We tried to look at that, the impact of the use of Zoom in place of face-to-face meetings, the presence of cameras in legislative sessions. Some states have them, some states don't have them. And unfortunately, the more technology, the more division we found. So you would think that if TVW is televising and recording and archiving every meeting, public meeting, that people would be more intended to demonstrate civil conduct and proper conduct and so on. It's just the reverse. So if you have 2 minutes on TVW that you can extract and use in your campaign ad on how tough you are, that's what you want to say during that time period. And then if I don't agree with you, react in the same way and I have the same thing. So it goes back to what those two ladies were saying about being in a time when it's really hard to model good behavior because it's not expected from people that follow you. There's maybe something about media that when you can choose it, when I grew up, everybody watched the same news, evening news. We all had a common thing. We had Walter Cronkite to rely on. We don't have that anymore. So it's so difficult to get these common themes going. Most of my colleagues that do this kind of work say you have to get people in groups to talk to each other and form a personal connection before they'll really listen to each other, and that you can't really do it through media. Maybe better media will work better to build bridges, I don't know, but it hasn't worked so far that way, unfortunately. Yes?
You mentioned social media and
I can't hear very well, so I'm going to come up here. Yeah, you can give him, I can answer a question.
Go ahead and shake your hand now,
Thank you.
Dr. Lovrich.
Thank you.
He and I are old friends, but I just wanted to say, you mentioned the social media and the extremists. I mean, I'm only saying that because, you know, it's true. News organizations being sources of the discord. Is there like a root cause that led to that you know of?
Wow. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'm speculating. So I'm not the scientist now, I'm just a citizen. But it seems to me we have lost interest in the middle. There used to be a source of pride that you had friends, a variety of friends, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, you can get together. And now we've seen this giant sorting into red states, blue islands and within red states and so on, where we don't communicate. My wife is like this. She does not tolerate anybody who's not left-wing. And she grew up in Utah. She was Republican, very conservative when she before going off to college. And I said, don't you keep track of your friends? No, I don't, they're all MAGA. Well, aren't they your friends? Nah, like, how can they be my friends? You know, they're MAGA. Well, how are we ever gonna get out of this if we can't maintain friendships despite the fact that we have very different points of view? So I have a really good friend who's a Washington State Patrol officer. And I helped him a lot, and he helped me a lot. He's MAGA. So when my wife met him, she says, I don't want to ever have him in my house again. I said, you can't do that. There's something going on where that's okay. The people that she sees, she's comfortable with, but she doesn't want to be uncomfortable with anybody else, even how good they might be or not be. She will never know. But I can't convince my own wife, so I don't know if I can convince anybody else in my writing or anything else. People are feeling this sense. They want to be around people like themselves and only people around themselves and be comfortable. Well, the country isn't like that. It's not permitting us to be like that. And we have to find a better way. All of these people working on this, like Tammy Pfeiffer. I mean, I love her. She knows exactly what she's talking about. Things are changing in a way where her own family doesn't want to be a family anymore. We can't do that. When that shooting happened in Utah, and it was a Utah kid that killed, I forget his name now, but anyway. Yeah. Governor Cox came out in public, and he made all the feds stay in the background. He says, this is a Utah thing. We have to fix this here. Don't come and make it worse. Governor Cox is an interesting guy. He sensed what was going on when Tammy was working for him, and he said, okay, I have an idea. Why don't the Democratic candidate for governor and myself, Republican, why don't we do a TV spot together? Not an ad attacking each other, but an ad together. And what are we going to say in that ad? And KSL paid for it, and then everybody thought it was a good idea. he said, I'm Spencer Cox. I'm a Republican. I have the better ideas for Utah's future than my opponent. I forget Walker, I think, Scott Walker or something like that. And but he's a good man. I don't dislike him. We just disagree. And then the Democrat gets a microphone and says the same thing. Yeah, I think my ideas are better than his, but he's a good man. And we should all go and think about and vote and listen, and then vote for who we prefer, and then we support that. Whoever is elected is going to serve everybody, Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals. And so he's trying his best to model what he thinks will get us out of this, to be able to disagree in an amicable way within boundaries, respecting the institutions that provide us with the final choice of preference for that time period. But there are many others who are doing politics who don't want to play by those rules. And if we don't choose people as leaders who want to be in that role rather than antagonizing, separating, and polarizing even further, we'll probably be stuck in this place for a long time. I hope it's not too long. I'm 80 years old. I won't see the end of this. But you young people have a future to build. And it should be better than what we have now.
Okay, I think we're probably at time.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
All right, let's give Dr. Lovrich a little We'll be around for maybe another 10 minutes or so if you have a quick question you want to ask. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Keep an eye out for the continued